All right. I'm going over to the fire department for the 16 hours or whatever.
Okay, hello everybody and welcome to COVID-19 Task Force. I don't have any minutes. Yesterday I sat in for a short period of time with the select board. I hope some of you saw that. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Pam because there was some discussion around the Parks and Recreation Commission and some issues with upcoming event on Sunday. So I'm going to turn it over to her now so she can discuss that issue, and then we can open up for discussion on that. And then I can just paraphrase a little bit about the meeting if anyone's interested. So go ahead, Pam.
Thanks, Bob. I did literally suffer through 7.5 hours of that meeting yesterday, but was taken back at the Parks and Recreation when it was said by a couple people that they had reached out to me regarding the sandcastle contest this weekend, and I had not received anything. I did communicate later in the evening with Michelle Lowe, one of the chair, I believe co-chair of that committee, and she had sent me an email. Sent me the email that I never got. So, so since that time, we've been communicating back and forth about the sandcastle contest. They apparently did try to reach out to us to see if we had any input as to what they were doing, and if that we thought as a committee that they had taken all the precautions that they possibly could for this particular type of event. The event is on Sunday, the 6th. It's from 9 o'clock till noon. High tide is at 2:30. Michelle and her volunteers will be there at 8:30. They'll only be on the beach till noon or less than that. Their plan is to walk the beach, look at the sandcastles. If they don't see a castle and somebody has decided that they wanted to enter into this event, they could take a picture of it, and Michelle has set up a separate email address where you can send your picture. They have been working with Matt Buttricks at the police department, who will be providing CSO support and or police reserve support and PPE. One of the things that she and I did talk about that is obviously was that any volunteers that were going to be patrolling and monitoring the beach needed to wear masks. And if they came upon a group of people that were making castles, to make sure that it was a family pod instead of a large group of people building a large sand artifact, and they weren't all from the same family, that they should be wearing masks if they weren't. And she was aware of that, and she said they would be carrying extra masks. They were, Bob had said that he had been on the beach during that time frame and with the tides coming at the same time, and felt that if people went far enough down the beach, there was enough room. And I agree with him, and I'm sure Terry Ann, you would agree with too. If they finish by noon and it's 2:30 is a high tide. So I think that will be, the weather looks like it's going to be low 70s. So I don't even know if we'll have that many people there. Today there was 8 cars this afternoon in the parking lot. But getting back to Parks and Recreation is what we determined, and since then have talked with Heath Ouellette, who's the chair of the select board, and via Jason, who is also the co-chair of the Parks and Recreation. They have their next meeting on September the 14th at noon. So I'm going to be attending that meeting. They have only one more big event right now, and that would be on Sunday the 6th, the same day as the Sandcastle contest, which is an art in the park music. It is from 5:30 to 7. It's I think the gentleman's name was Chris Murphy, and maybe somebody could correct me on that. I don't think it's relevant, but it's a big band. So if anybody's there, you know, it'd be nice if somebody could get over and take a look and making sure that they are following all the CDC protocols. I know that the CSOs have been there and been handing out masks. They've only had one incident where they had a crowd that was over, at that time, over the 50. Now they're up to 100 people they can have. They don't have anything big coming up for the fall, but if there is anything that they do that would entail a large group of people, they have asked for our input, and whether it is just to bless it and say it's okay, we think you're doing all the right things, or think there are extra precautions that you could take for the population at large. So I think that's about it, Bob.
Okay, thank you. So two things. I did go to the beach and measured the time that when I was there today to high tide today. And interestingly, the high tide on Sunday is 8.8 feet as it is today. So it looked like it was pretty doable for them, and they have put a lot of effort into it. This stems from a comment that I made last night in the meeting. I was just trying to make the point that a lot of events are being, contemplated and consecrated unilaterally without much input from us. And I wasn't being, snippy about it. I was just saying if the select board and the town authorities want to make these decisions, that's fine. I think it's okay because they can mimic what we've done in the past and they can follow the behaviors that we have set forth. I think that the select board kind of came back and said, well, we still want you to be involved in consultation with these events. So that's where this kind of transpired. And so I expect that the select board will ask people nicely to be in contact with us in advance so we can take a look at certain parameters around these events, which I don't think is a bad thing. And, we'll always be helpful. I did write to Parks and Recreation, to them this afternoon saying, we're here to help you, not here to, dictate or that kind of thing. So any comments from the membership on this? Rebecca.
Well, I'm hoping that if there is a large group constructing a sandcastle that needs to be broken up, that happens peacefully. Other than that, it sounds fine to me. I think the larger issue might be maybe we need to develop some simple criteria for when we need to be consulted, particularly as events go more indoors.
I think that's an excellent idea, Rebecca, considering I think they were talking at the meeting last night, and I'm not sure if this is correct or not, but looking at holding movies at the fire station, again, that's not a huge area and would require social distancing, masks. If in any movie, the first thing I think is popcorn, so you can't have popcorn unless it's all individual bags and all this kinds of stuff. So I think going forward, I know Michelle and I will be talking on a regular basis along with Jason on the types of activities that they're planning on doing. So I think my only concern for the weekend is that I do know that the chamber is doing a sidewalk sale. I believe it's all 4 days. So I know the town's aware of it, and I'm sure that Pat and her team are aware that they will need probably extra people on the sidewalks to be monitoring. If you can't go to the beach and you're anybody who wants to buy something, you're going to be going up and down seeing if you can get a bargain. So it's close quarters along the sidewalks.
Okay, let's see how it goes. Ken.
Yeah, just a quick comment, Pam. I'm happy to sit in with you as you discuss the other event, the Arts in the Park, the music performance on the 6th. There are specific guidelines for outside musical performances in terms of distance from the stage, considerations about the band. Have they been together in a pod, in a bubble for a while? Considerations like that too. So I'm happy to get you or Michelle up to speed on those.
Thank you, Ken. After this meeting, maybe you and I can coordinate and talk with Michelle, okay?
Sounds good. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody on the membership who may have seen the meeting, has any questions or comments? I don't, I think it's pretty straightforward. The select board said, keep going, do what you do. And they will encourage people to interact with us more frequently. So that was kind of the end result. I know that was hour 3 or 4 at 7:37. It's hour 3, and then we had 4 more hours to go. All right. Seeing none. Charlie. Hello, Charlie. Unmute yourself, Charlie.
How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing great. What'd you shoot today, Charlie?
I just got back from my staycation, so I didn't play today. I'm a little bit tired.
Is
So,
Eric going to join us today?
I didn't invite him, but he usually is automatically invited. I hope he's on because I hope
Yeah,
he
I
can.
told
give
him
us-
just come
Yeah.
on. So
But I don't know
I
if you got my email about, I don't know, 3/4 of an hour ago. Rebecca has been in touch with a friend of mine, Bob McBreen, who has been compiling some stats, and I was hoping Rebecca would introduce Bob, and maybe he could give other stats than what I have. I just want to quickly say that going through the CDC website, the main CDC website today, that what I noticed, and it's not anything unusual, our positivity rates at just under 2% at this point, and Cumberland and York counties continue to be the 2 counties most affected. Androscoggin's right behind, then Penobscot and Kennebec. I thought Penobscot would get a spike because of the Millinocket incident with the wedding up there, but it didn't show much. I mean, it maybe they haven't put those numbers in there yet. I'm not sure. The county least affected is Piscataquis. I think it's the least populated as well, and they've only had 8 cases, where Cumberland's had almost 2,200, and York has had 851. Androscoggin's had 616 cases thus far. This is overall. By age, it still continues to be the younger people who are more affected, but the numbers, the number of cases, for instance, for 20-year-olds, there've been 765. 30-year-olds, 710, 40-year-olds, 667, 50-year-olds, 733. Then it drops to 525 for 60-year-olds and 356 for 70-year-olds and 346 for 80 and above. But the concern is, us people who are in the older age brackets tend to die more from it. Anyway, I did notice there's in the sex, between men and women, the numbers are almost the same until you get to hospitalizations. There have been 240 men hospitalized and only 183 women. So 57 more men hospitalized than women, but the other numbers are pretty close. So anyway, with that, I'm hoping Eric is on, but even if he isn't, I'm hoping in that Bob, he said he'd come on, Bob McBreen, and give his compiled stats, which are quite a bit different than mine, that I just gave basics. So anyway, with that, I'll see who is available, and
Well, there's Eric.
oh, good.
There's our man. And I think we'll put Mr. McBreen in the data section under subgroups so that Kent
Perfect.
and Rebecca can manage through that part
Okay.
in their
Great.
time. And if they need to take extra time with that, again, we have a 5:30 shut off, so we will work towards that. So hello, Eric.
Hello, how we doing, everyone?
We're all good, I think. Everyone looks good. How's it going out there in York Hospital?
So at York Hospital, it's looking good. It continues to look really good. We can probably get into the to the story that's coming out of York County, and maybe Charlie touched on that before I got on. Obviously, that's given, I think, some folks pause. But let's cover York Hospital first, like I usually do. We've had no new hospital admissions since I spoke to you all 2 weeks ago. Interestingly, the same 2 people that were admitted that week are still in the hospital, but seem to be improving. So no new admissions. Nobody under investigation currently at the hospital. So we had that little bit of a blip there. Our gating criteria hasn't changed. It actually went down for the week of August 23rd to August 29th. Our percent positive rate was 0.5%. We are actually noticing a slight trend the last 3 weeks. We're doing less testing. So going back to the week of August 9th, we did a high of 1,075 tests. The week of August 16th, we did 1,032. And then last week, we did 966. So we're seeing a little trend going down. I attribute that to, I think we're weaning out of tourist season, which is probably driving a lot of traffic. We did see a little bit of the college students using our test site because a lot of the local universities required a negative COVID screen to get to campus. And those kids are pretty much back on campus now. So maybe that's explaining our slight downtrend. So good news for the southern Maine coast of York County. It's a slightly different story, I think, just to our west. I don't know if Charlie, you touched on that as part of your report.
No, I didn't touch on it, Eric.
Okay, so
I figured you probably would cover that as far as the jail and so on.
Yep. So everyone's watched the news. I'm sure there was a wedding up in Millinocket, Maine, in I think it was August 9th. It was that had a outbreak of cases, and the tentacles of that outbreak has reached York County. So apparently, one of the guests at the wedding was worked at the York County Jail. And now subsequently, as of yesterday, I didn't hear today's numbers, but there was about 69 total cases attributed to the York County Jail and Alfred. There's a church in Sanford, the Calvary Baptist Church. The pastor of that church officiated the wedding up in Millinocket. And several people from that church, I think, went to that wedding as well. So there's at least 5 cases that we know of at the church. The Sanford Fire Department had a handful of cases as well, again, tied to that outbreak. So why that's interesting to us is because we've talked a little bit about this on the committee. Sometimes, the Maine CEC typically breaks things out by county and views counties as a whole. There was some teasing out of different towns. But for example, schools are getting ready to open in the next week or so, and all schools were green going into this week. But the Department of Education has put an asterisk next to York County and Penobscot County, given these 2 outbreaks, and they will make their final decision Friday as to whether that status changes. And if it does, it may impact or delay starts of school. The other thing coming into play, the news you're following, is fall sports in the high schools. That's something that the Maine Principals Association voted to go forward with. The state came back and said, not so fast. And made some, took a strong position on that. So that's still to be determined, it sounds like. So that is the overview of what's going on here at York Hospital and extending out into our communities in our county. So glad to answer any questions.
So Eric, I have a question. It's really not related to the numbers because I think the numbers were in the press release yesterday around as you described, in the tentacles that have reached York County. But I mentioned in a select board meeting last night, and I was going to ask you, and I talked about your presence on our task force. So Abbott Laboratories has come out now with what is kind of a pseudo home test capability, which looks like it'll end up based on FDA information in pharmacies. It's a swab on a credit card, supported by an app. I'm wondering if you know any more about that test, and how do you perceive that as either a detriment or a benefit to fighting this disease?
Yeah, I'll actually reference Buzzy. I think asked me this question maybe a month or so ago. He asked if we're going to be dealing with this in a year, and I predicted that we may have something more tangible. I think that that will expand our testing capability. I'm not sure if this is quite the solution yet, but you can see the technology and the innovation is pushing the testing platforms to get more creative. So the product you're talking to is actually also manufactured by Abbott Laboratories, which is right here in Scarborough, Maine. They're talking about an October date with that, Bob. Our hospital has expressed interest in kind of how that would roll out. They're promising up to 50 million tests per month in terms of production. It is an antigen test. I want to point out the difference between a molecular test and an antigen test. So not getting too deep into the science, the testing that we typically do now, certainly the testing I do at York and that most places do, are molecular tests. You're detecting fragments of the RNA of the virus, which are very sensitive. An antigen test is looking to identify proteins that sit on the virus. So it's detecting something slightly different. And historically, antigen tests are not quite as sensitive as molecular testing or PCR testing, another word you may have heard in the news. So I'll give you a real life example. Many of us have had a sore throat, and you go to the emergency room, the urgent care, your doctor's office, and they swab your throat and they do a rapid strep test. Everyone familiar with that? It's about 80% sensitive. So it's an okay test. And if it's positive, you're all done and you get antibiotics and off you go. But a negative test, then you do what's called a throat culture. If you have ever experienced this, then you have to wait another day or two, right, for the culture result to come back. So that's an example. The rapid strep is an antigen test. Good test, not a great test. So I think, Bob, one of the concerns about this is I do think it can have an impact. It's great to have more testing, but the results, I think, have to be interpreted with regard to their sensitivity. I like the direction it's going in. I think it's another tool to the toolbox. But I think we'll have to wait and see. We're watching that closely. The other news that broke today, I think you may have seen the New York Times and other outlets are reporting possible vaccine by the end of 2020. I'm hearing as early as possibly November. I don't know anything more than you would read in the newspaper or anything like that, but it seems like that conversation has become a little bit more palpable. So we'll have to watch out for that as well. That will be interesting to see because on one hand, it's incredibly quick getting to a vaccine. It would be the fastest in the history to get a vaccine. So efficacy and safety would be a concern. But on the other hand, it could be truly, possibly one of those game changers that would really get us over the hump. Because we've all talked about, the vaccine is really the thing that will get us hopefully through this. So.
Thank you, Eric. Just a note on that. I told the select board last night about some of the vaccines that I know about, but I told them we don't play in the vaccine or the medical arena. But I know a lot of people are worried about the speed of approval here. We also have to remember at the FDA, and I've been putting drugs in front of the FDA for 30 years, has a certain way of doing things. Takes a little while, sometimes 7 years. The FDA is doing a much different type of screening this time because it's so important. So a lot of the extra waiting gets kind of eliminated. We used to put a drug in front of them, and 6 months to a year later, you'd get some kind of disposition, even at an early stage. They're now, looking at things, 24/7. So that does allow us a little faster time. But I agree. I don't want anything to be unsafe, and we'll see how it goes.
Sure.
I got a question, Eric. As a coach of the Wells High School golf team, I've been following the MPA and the education departments back and forth about whether fall sports will go. I'm not as concerned about golf because, it's pretty easy to stay a safe distance when you're playing golf, especially now where they don't allow for the pin to be pulled and for people to gather. But what I am concerned about is football and some of the other sports like basketball and field hockey, where they really smash into each other and come close to each other an awful lot. So short of what they've done professionally, where they put these people in a bubble, where they get tested every day and they're not allowed to leave the premises, like in the basketball playoffs and the hockey playoffs that are going on now. What do you think? I'm wondering if football can even happen, sports like that, but is there a protocol for that? I mean, how are they going to do that? I mean, these kids are going to go home to their families every day. And what if one of them is infected? I mean, the whole team will get infected at that point, won't they?
Yeah, so what I know is not all sports are created equal in terms of their proximity and closeness, and totally agree. And like you, I've tried to play some golf this summer and felt very safe. Football is a different activity, and many football high school programs are going on currently in this country, particularly in the South. And it's interesting watching that data. And there hasn't been yet, and I'm just sharing facts here. Don't draw any correlation, but there hasn't been any outbreaks yet linked to high school football in the southern states. And who knows? It's early as well. But some of the early discussions here up in Maine about playing football with your mouth guard stays in the entire time. Players are required to wear a face shield within the helmet. So some of those ideas, but the state came out yesterday, listed football still as a high risk sport. And so their recommendation was only intramural scrimmages and no games between other towns. So that was the state's recommendation on football. I think volleyball was the other one that fell into that high risk category. And the recommendation was that they play outdoors, which, volleyball is an indoor sport, obviously in the fall. So I think there is, Charlie, concern regarding those close contact sports, because it is hard to protect. People are so close for periods of time that it does pose a risk. I think people recognize that. And so we'll see on that. I would have concern about football differently than I would certainly about golf. And I have a daughter who plays college sports. She's a lacrosse player. It's a spring sport. She's a senior. She's a captain on the team. And, I'm hopeful that the spring looks a little bit different, and we'll just have to see.
Thank you.
Okay, by the way, Tom, you can spin up chat if you want. I haven't seen any chats, but if you want, because I know sometimes the public would like to ask Eric directly a question. So if you could spin that up for us, that would be great. Go ahead, Rick.
Eric, I don't know the truth of this, but one of my guests said that there was a sign on the coming into Maine that said testing site closed yesterday. Please make it, but then they couldn't remember the whole thing. Do you know something happened yesterday or?
Not my site. So did I tell you guys this 2 weeks ago? I can't remember that Kittery at the rest stop stood up a swab and send, and they are not a 7-day operation. I think they go Wednesday through Saturday or Tuesday, something like that. So when they're closed, like Monday, maybe when your customer drove by, or they do have a flashing sign that does say closed. So I think they were referencing the Kittery side. I was open. Open.
Yeah, and it could have been 2 days. It could have been 2 days they drove by there.
I bet it was Monday, and it was because I think they have a flashing sign on the turnpike and then one on Route 1 as you come up on the backside of the rest stop. You know how you can sneak through that rest stop on Route 1 there in Kittery? You can sneak to the rest stop.
It wasn't you guys shut down just to take a day off.
I wish. But, no.
Okay, any other questions? I don't see any chats coming up for Eric this time. Oh, here's one. I don't know if that's for you, Eric, but that's from somebody.
Do restaurants and businesses have an obligation to report cases if the staff, do do the restaurants have an obligation to report cases of staff to? The obligation sits at the testing site. So when we have a positive test, the first thing I do is call the state, and it starts the contact tracing. So I don't believe the restaurant has an obligation to do that. That's handled through the test site and the main CDC. Eric wants to know if the rapid test antigen or PCR. So it's definitely not an antigen test. It's a molecular test. By definition, I believe it's a PCR because it amplifies the viral RNA fragments. But Abbott, it's different than a lab-based PCR test, which gets sent out to a lab. So we deal with this a lot with international travel. And some colleges, they will specify that they want a lab-based PCR versus the rapid molecular test. So my rapid is not antigen, but it sometimes does not meet the threshold for some folks requesting testing because it's not a lab-based PCR. So Eric, I hope that answers that question. I believe that most of the cases that we're seeing from the jail have been asymptomatic cases or mildly symptomatic cases, and they were discovered by mass testing and not coming forth for only testing if they were symptomatic. So I think we're seeing a good percentage of those as asymptomatic cases, and that's been true at my test site all along. The majority of the tests that we do, the patient has been asymptomatic.
Eric, do you think that's a result of the phenomena that happens with some viruses, that they tend to weaken so that they're not killing their host over time? Is there any data that you can share on that?
Well, I'll tell you this, that it appears that the more symptomatic somebody is, the easier it seems to spread from what we can tell from household contacts. I've read about that in the research, but I've tested so many people and heard so many stories. It's fascinating. Once we have an index case positive and then contacts start coming in, it's interesting who converts a positive test and who doesn't. So, I think it's hard to totally say. The other thing is this whole notion of asymptomatic. I know it freaks people out, and I can see why, and I appreciate that because it spreads without knowing, right? I mean, that's the obvious concern. But I bet you if we randomly tested if we tested people for the flu all winter, you would see a similar phenomenon with respiratory viruses, that people would test positive who feel fine. So I don't think this is unique to COVID. I think what's unique is we're doing so much more testing here that we are appreciating the asymptomatic carriers of this virus. So what we know is these cases are upticking, but hospitalizations aren't. And that's another interesting phenomenon.
Anything on antibody testing so we can all go find out if we ever had this recently?
So we just bought, we've been collecting, if a physician or provider writes an order for antibiotic testing, we would grab those at York Hospital, we'll draw them and we send them out. But this week we bought an antibody a machine that would allow us to do the test so we don't have to send it out, which was a change of strategy with our ID docs. And just to give you a little background, our concern with antibody testing was, what would you do with the information? Meaning, what we know is that that after any sort of illness, your body produces antibodies. But because this is a new novel virus, if we measure antibodies and we detect them, we don't have enough information to know yet if they are protective, if they're immune protective, like you would a titer for measles or hepatitis B that you've all had titers for. And the other thing is, we know that these antibodies wane probably in 90 days. The data is showing us by 90 days, you have very, very low levels of antibodies. That doesn't mean you're not immune either. You have other parts of your immune system that can fight infection, like B cells and T cells and that sort of thing, for you science majors out there or immunologists. But I think, so Bob, if you thought you maybe had this in March possibly, and you came and we did antibody testing today in September, if I said you were negative, I'm not sure that meant you didn't have it in March and just your antibodies had waned by this point and were undetectable or not. But I think they're going to be helpful as this vaccine kind of comes to market, because I think it's important for that type of data. In other words, you've got the vaccine and did you mount a antibody response in 2 weeks? That might be helpful. Also, from an epidemiology standpoint, antibody testing can be helpful when you look at populations that might test positive with antibodies. But I've had to counsel patients who have come back and had positive antibodies, but it doesn't mean that I just don't know what, it's not me personally, the medical community doesn't know what to do quite yet with that information. So nothing too new, but the new interesting thing is, in addition to antibodies, they're looking at T cell measurements and B cell measurements to see how that part of the immune system has responded in addition to antibodies. So stay tuned.
Thank you. I think someone else had their hand up. I didn't see. We kind of got to let Eric go soon. Okay, last one, Rebecca.
There were just two pieces that Bob McBreen told me about that might fit in more appropriately right here. One is he's really been looking at York County, and interestingly enough, and the way the positives are counted. And interestingly enough, in the York County Jail, the inmates are counted in York County, but the employees are counted in the county that they live.
Sure.
So, when you look at the counts from Millinocket and Sanford and the jail in Alfred, sometimes the numbers don't match up intuitively. And I think it has something to do with the way that the tests are counted, where they come from. The other thing is he found out from the CDC that between April 1st and August 27th, so a period of 5 months, the state did 6,958 tests on out-of-state residents. And from that, there were 219 positive tests. So 219 isn't nothing, but given that they did almost 7,000 tests, and Eric, I'm sure you did a load of these, the positivity rate was quite low.
Yeah, and you're right. The count always goes to the home state for sure. It's been one of those. I agree. It doesn't paint the whole picture. I don't know the background of why that happens. If someone's up here for the entire summer, but they have a Florida, like we have a lot of people that have Florida addresses because of the tax benefit, but live up here all 6 months. So you would think that would be wanted to be reflected in our community, that count, but it would go to Florida in those cases. So interesting for sure. Interesting for sure. I also think that the next 3 months should be really interesting. We've begun preparations at York Hospital for the cold/flu/COVID season. I will share with you, if you haven't seen it already, that the data from the Southern Hemisphere is starting to emerge. They're just finishing their winter season down south of the equator, and their flu counts are incredibly small. Haven't had that many low flu counts in a long time. They're attributing that to a variety of things. They had a large flu shot campaign, just like you're hearing about up here already. Get your flu shots. They also are masking, social distancing, and those, they think those are impactful. So we're preparing for what could be the, a bunch of flu and whatnot cases, but we have a little bit of comfort in knowing that our Southern Hemisphere folks did not seem to experience much of a flu season. We'll just have to watch that and see how it plays out. But I would encourage everyone to get a flu shot.
Okay, one more chat there, Eric. Is it too early to get a flu shot?
So, Bobby, this is a great question, and you're hearing a lot of push to get the flu shot. I think the CDC's message this year is get it early, because I think they want people to get vaccinated. But it's important to note that flu shot vaccinations, the immunity that you get from those wanes in about 6 months. And if you recall, particularly the 2017, 2018 flu season, we saw a bunch of cases in February, March, and April. It came late. So I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer here. I think it's fine if you want to get a flu shot now. They're available. York Hospital got their shipment, and we started with our inventory this week. the chains and the retails always get theirs first in the state. So I think the CVS and whatnot started 2 or 3 weeks ago early. I personally, if you want to know, I'm going to wait till the 1st of October to get mine, just to get me a little bit of carryover into 2021. So take that with you. There's no wrong answer. No wrong answer. Can you get a second one? Another great question. There's been studies looking at a second application of flu shots, and the fascinating thing about it, no gained immunity going into, doesn't add another 6 months. So logically, you think it'd help, and it's such a great question, but it doesn't play out, and the data doesn't show that it's beneficial. So you never hear that promoted by the CDC. It's a one and done thing and doesn't make sense, but good question.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Appreciate it as always, and hope to see you in 2 weeks.
Always a pleasure, guys. Have a great couple weeks and talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, next on our agenda is Rick with any citizen contact. I haven't seen much, and I haven't gotten much directly to me. Anything, Rick, that you want to highlight?
No, not really. There really has been very quiet. The only was Eric Brass had sent us some information about some testing sites in Massachusetts that were going to be very helpful. And now, as it turns out, they're not as convenient or as affordable as the original thought was. Actually had guests who went to one of the sites and they paid $150 each to have their tests done. But aside from that, we really haven't had any, people have come up and said, things are looking good. Guests of ours are saying how they're really comfortable here in town because they're walking around and people are wearing masks and people are respectful. And again, I can't speak for the beach itself because I don't get down there later in the day, but our guests are saying that they felt very comfortable on the beach because they could walk down and get away from crowds. So I think we're all doing a darn good job right now.
Yeah.
Just to add on to Rick, I did talk to the code enforcement officer, and since the last time we spoke, he's only had one call about a restaurant, and other than that, nothing.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. And I skipped over Tom. Oh, man, I didn't follow the agenda. That 7 hours yesterday really wiped me out, but okay. Tom, sorry. God, and I even wrote Tom on the agenda. Here, I wrote it.
Well,
Did I miss it?
you get a break because it actually says Matt, not Tom. So that's the issue. We'll blame it on that. So I'm up an update on our end. The weekend after the last meeting, we had officers or CSOs at Main Beach and Footbridge beach lots and beach entrances. On Saturday, about 400 masks were given out, and Sunday about 200. We continue to do some proactive and reactive checks for businesses. We're doing random spot checks at businesses for compliance. It's been well received, and we've really had very few violations. Any issues that we've encountered have been minor and were corrected right away while doing the check. In the masks that we have been going out, we started giving out individually wrapped masks, or if we don't have those available, the officers and CSOs were using gloves just to help limit the spread of any germs when handing out masks, since we're handing them out to lots of people. There are 2 mailboxes for mask, self-service mask dispensing. There's one at the Main Beach Bathhouse, and then another one at the Marginal Way entrance on Shore Road. The PD's been assisting in filling those for DPW, keeping those full. Those are, again, those have the individually wrapped masks in there. That way people aren't touching them, and then, next person comes along and somebody's touched all the masks. We continue to provide PPE to all the town departments and any residents in town or anybody who asks, really. So giving out lots of PPE to anybody who needs it. As far as the reactive business checks, We've had a handful of complaints over the past 2 weeks, but again, it's been very minor, or there have been no concerns when we actually respond and check on it. The businesses are very receptive, and any incidents, we're just educating and correcting the issues that are there. Complaints outside of businesses, like the Marginal Way was a spot that had a lot of complaints about no masks in the past. That's not happening so much anymore. Very low. Last week we gave 1 ticket to 1 person who refused to wear a mask, but otherwise there's been very good compliance, and as a result we've been receiving very few complaints about people not wearing masks on the Marginal Way. So that's going pretty well. And so what we're doing there's the mailbox at the Shore Road entrance, and then halfway through at the lighthouse, that's where we've been keeping an officer, or typically a CSO, to hand out masks or remind people to wear their masks. Some equipment stuff. So Dave Riccio, he applied for a state grant. Part of that was for cameras. So given the time of year, we've lost some CSOs going back to school or just back to regular jobs. So we've deployed some cameras in the more remote lots, or even down at Main Beach. That way, because we just don't have as much staff, we're able to cover ideally the same amount of area and then deploy our resources where they're needed. So we can monitor the cameras, say at Footbridge or North Beach or Main Beach. And if we see a lot of non-compliance, then we can send an officer to that area, instead of, just purely guessing where they should be. And I think that's it for the update. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Tom, this is PM. I have one question. I know we hired some community ambassadors. How are they identified? Do they have uniforms? I know the CSOs have the blue uniforms that say CSO. Do these ambassadors, how would you know one if you spotted one?
I'll be honest, I have absolutely no idea. So they're not employed by the police department like the CSOs. They're town employees. We help to train them on the rules and regulations, but outside of that, we have nothing to do with them. And I unfortunately don't work during the day, so I don't even see them to know who they are. So I wouldn't even know who they are. I don't know. They may have some sort of identification or a lanyard with an ID. I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Rebecca?
I think I remember Pat Finnegan saying they had badges or something they wore around their neck, like a lanyard that identified them.
It's very possible. We have a machine here to create like an ID that we could have made for them. So that might have happened. Again, I wasn't part of that, and I'm not sure.
Pat's on. Hey, Pat, if you're out there, if you want to you don't have to come on video if you don't want, because I know you're really busy, but if you just want to update that question. There she is. No, maybe Pat. Okay, well, maybe her computer's on and she's in consultation elsewhere. So we'll get an answer to that later. So thank you, Tom, and thank you for your service. Appreciate it. And we're going to move on here then to the subgroups. Now, I want us to start thinking about, are these subgroups still appropriate and for what we're going to be doing in the future based on some of the conversations at the select board? And we don't have to make any decisions today, but I'm going to ask you to think about that and provide any information on how we organize this going forward, because time is different now. We're at that point where things are going pretty well. Compliance is pretty good. Numbers look good, but we still have to be vigilant. But let's think about how we organize ourselves. But because the agenda is written this way, we'll start with Rebecca and Kent, who will bring, I think, Mr. McBreen on or not. I don't know. It's up to you guys. It's your time.
Thanks, Bob. If we do have time, we'll bring him on for sure. So at our meeting 2 weeks ago, Becky and I recapped a prior meeting we had with Mike Blazejowski, where we reviewed his beach congestion model or his beach crowding model. And we reported at that meeting that the numbers that Mike derived were very similar to what we did through looking at other data that we had. We went away from the meeting 2 weeks ago with a task to come back to the task force and recap some recommendations and considerations for the town to consider, if not for this season, to control or limit crowds in and on and around the beach, if not for this year, for future consideration next season or the following season if we're dealing with pandemic conditions or any other conditions. So Becky and I compiled 4 points that we wanted to discuss with the task force today, and we're going to kind of tag team through those. So Becky, if you want to kick it off.
Sure. The first one, not only is this sort of hopefully a discussion for the record, but we may have a new normal going forward where we don't want to be in crowded situations the way we might have been comfortable in the past, whether there's an acute pandemic or not. And the other is to see if there were some issues that we could recommend the town or its committees or boards to work on over the fall and winter that might be more general. So the first issue is entrance. The entrance ramp to the beach is the main area of congestion. And we know that it's used for all sorts of functions, passenger drop-off, access to restaurants and clothing and the bathrooms and the lifeguards, walking to and from the beach. And also it's the location for any emergency vehicle that comes down there. So the issue is the inability to social distance and the low mask usage going on and off the beach. And certainly the CSO and police presence have helped with this, but they can't always be there. So we came up with 2 ideas of what could be explored. The first is to create another ramp so that each would be one way. The closest other existing ramp is the steel one that's quite steep, and it's also potentially an area of the beach where the tide is even higher. And so there was historically an attempt to redesign that whole area and also restriping the parking lot, which would involve permission and design. I doubt that that's the kind of project that's going to be a priority given the financial situation that we're going into. But that might be an opportunity, if that's ever done, to see whether it's possible to put another ramp on the other side of the canopy seating area. The second idea is to find out a little bit more about an alternative pathway, which is around the Norseman to get to the beach, to try to reroute people that way. So I know there's some big issues with that. Who owns the land? Who owns the lane? Who owns the path? Would that lead to destruction of the dunes, which we certainly wouldn't want to happen? Is it possible to widen the path? Would we want to do that? So there's all sorts of issues in there to explore. But if you only have one entrance that's congested, you either have to create a go around or you have to create another entrance. So we don't really know whether either of those options would play out, but those were the 2 discussion points. Does anyone have something to say about that?
I just have a quick thing. Conservation looked at that Norseman path multiple times, and the Norseman owns the lion's share of that, and the other side are the dunes. So, which then during the plover season, people cut into the dunes, And so it proves a challenge. If there was a way to gain access to do something, that would be great. But I think it really does prove a challenge for both those aspects. I do want to make one quick comment about some of the CSOs. There's one particular one that has been down on the beach a lot, who I've noticed has been going around there and actually watching people go that way too, to make sure that they have masks on, and has been kicking people out of the dunes, which is, I think, very, very appropriate. He's very diligent in his job. He's one of the older CSOs.
So my comment is, I think we ought to consider how to do this based on that metal ramp, how to reconstruct that, and in a very detailed manner. I think it's something that I tried to impress upon the select board in a kind of a subtle way, that there's things we're going to do that aren't going to impact this year. If you heard my little talk, I don't think we're going to be making management changes to the beaches this year, but we should be doing something in the event that, say the vaccines don't work, say this continues, say we go through another season. And anyway, that ramp is really not that safe, even in good times. And it's just not very well constructed. So I don't see it as a problem. I wouldn't qualify our decision-making based on finances. If the select board says, yeah, we can't afford it, we can't afford it. But I think we ought to be, and we should be reasonable, obviously, but I think we ought to put together what is the most healthy plan for infrastructure at the beach, put it on paper, and then make the recommendation to the select board, and let the town authorities and the select board think about how they want to manage that. And if they say, well, we just can't afford it, well, they can't afford it. But at the very least, we made the attempt to bring a infrastructure change that in bad times will be very helpful, and in good times would be very convenient, I think. I mean, you could go down that metal ramp could have a turn in it and go straight down, particularly at high tide. It could go that way. I was looking at that because I went down that ramp once, and it's just not a very good ramp. So I think I'm thinking more strategically here. Our thinking should be, we come up with a plan that's detailed, we make the recommendation, and then they decide on it. So I think that's how I would proceed on this. And if they don't go for it, they don't go for it.
Well, I think the idea about having another entrance would be that each one would be one way, so that you wouldn't come face to face with people. And how we would get people used to using one way might be another story. But like you say, if you build it, people will get the hang of it.
We all got the hang of wearing a mask, I think. Oh, yeah. Behavior modification. I once had a psychologist who told me you can't change people's behavior, but I believe you can. Okay, keep going, guys. Sounds good.
Okay, so the potential action item for the entrance congestion is to recommend exploring additional entrance to reduce single ramp congestion. The second one is high tide, which is another difficult one. The tide mark varies, but the area on the beach where you can sit is dramatically reduced when the tide comes in, which we all know. Tourists may not be aware of this limited space, and those entering and exiting the beach experience increased congestion as the beach narrows with the tide. A walkway could be created extending along the front of the Norseman and canopy area, and that was what Mike particularly designed. Was he measured the high tide area, and there could be 2 rows of people sitting safely, but that the third row up to the water would be a walkway. So how that walkway would happen would be perhaps cones or lines or sand markers of some kind. And who would do that, obviously, and the timing of when that would happen, and would you set it up early in the day? or would you set it up before, 2 hours before the tide was coming in and ask people to move? I mean, and logistically, it's not an easy one. The other issue is to advertise the tides when high tide is more, so that people are more aware of when the beach is more crowded. So that could be a sign on Route 1, that could be lodgings handing out. I know the chamber always has a tide chart in their brochure, but handing out something when people check in, telling them when the tides are. Signs that say high tide is at noon, beach will be more congested, something so that people would recognize the fact that it's safer to go to the beach at low tide. So the two items from that are to recommend exploring a walkway system and also to advertise more when high tide is. Any comments on that?
Not for me. Anybody else? Rick?
One of the concerns about the walkway that you're discussing is the Norseman apparently owns a piece of the beach right in front of its wall. And I don't know how far out it goes, so you'd have to take that into consideration. Is all I think of.
Keep going, Bob?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, please.
moving along. Consideration number 3 that we discussed, that Rebecca and I discussed, is limiting the beach population. And we talked about this at our last meeting as well. With the current recommendations of the 12-foot social distancing between parties, that computes to about 4,000 beachgoers. And remember, we talked last week or 2 weeks ago, Bob, you asked what that is at 6 feet, and that's 7,800 people. So the recommendation is to explore limitations imposed by other towns, or benchmark other towns, how they're limiting the population on their beaches, do some benchmarking at the state level, figure out a way to know what's going on our own beach in terms of the size of the individual parties that we're looking at. And as we all know, we've struggled with figuring out the average summer beach population. We think we've got it pretty close, but finding out a way to get a really good solid count on that, and then extrapolate that from that, the numbers that may be beachgoers. The issues to consider are maintaining a count, enforcement, and any methods of potential beach closure. If we have to close part of the beach for the tides and things like that, those are some things to consider. Potential action items: recommend research into success and or failure of towns that did impose actions, both in coastal and in lake communities, and estimate the maximum beach capacity and adjust parking to correlate with that. So that's number 3. Any questions or thoughts on that?
Just one, Kent, or maybe two. Limiting parking, I don't think will stop the number of people, because even though the parking lot may not be filled, you're going to have your people that are going to be walking from the hotels, walking from town, walking from their homes, etc. So I don't think that the number of cars in the parking lot correlate to the number of people on the beach. I think there is some correlation, but not 100%. The other thing is, there is no food at either Footbridge and or North Beach. And I don't know if you've looked at this, that at one time the town did look at the potential of putting some sort of food truck at those areas, which might encourage people to go down further to the beach, further to the Footbridge, further to North Beach. You can walk off at Main Beach and be crowded. By the time you get to marker 5 or 6, there's nobody there. By the time you get to North Beach, there's hardly anybody there. And that parking lot is always the last one to fill up. Again, the services, if you have younger children who need food, there's nothing down there. So that might be a way to encourage people to use that further end of the beach, as opposed to right there coming off the beach.
Thanks, Pam. You're a great straight person, and you stole my thunder for point number 4, which is to reduce the parking lot
Or
capacity.
you could look at it as a good
Yeah.
segue.
Yeah,
It's a good
I've
segue.
been
Yeah.
singing that song for a long time, Ken.
You have, yeah. So that was the 4th consideration that we discussed a couple weeks ago is looking at the parking lot and assuming that limiting parking space will have some sort of an impact on beach population right there at Main Beach, and it may disperse it just to reduce that beach congestion. We talked about reserving some spots specifically for residents. That's not the way it works now. So again, that may help matters. And balancing the town parking lot revenue with the safe beach conditions, increase parking lot fees to make up for potential losses of revenue. These are all things that we considered and talked about, and I think that would be a good recommendation for the town as well. We also talked about and would recommend to the town doing some research on reservation systems. There are other towns that do that. You get your parking space in advance, develop an application that shows availability in our parking lots, and then communications between visitor services and the road signs that will guide tourists to the spot where they have the best opportunity to have some space to themselves on the beach. So yeah, basically everything you just said, Pam. These parking lot reductions we think may be limited. We don't know, but it's something for the town to consider and look into. Maybe the limitations are on weekends and holidays when the volume is the highest based on the parking data we've looked at. And pilot a program with visitor services staff having input to these processes. And then we previously discussed having considerations around limiting parking during the high tides. We said that's pretty impractical to do. It's hard to empty lots during high tide or restrict them because by the time the tides come around, the lot's usually full. So, but maybe some thought around that and just drive that to ground if it's something that makes sense or not. So the issues are we've got 3 beach parking lots that currently have a little over 800 parking spaces. We've got a couple other lots in town. We have, to your point, Pam, we've got pedestrians coming to the beach. We have trolley drop-offs, a bunch of different ways to get to the beach. So getting our hands around what those numbers are is still a challenge. All things that the town should be looking into and figuring out what are the sources of beachgoers and you know, what is the impact of controlling the parking. The second thing we considered is increasing the appeal of the footbridge and north beaches by adding those vending machines or food trucks and the like to disperse the crowd a bit more. Some of the issues that I'm sure we'll have to consider during this is there are zoning issues. What are the impacts on neighborhoods and getting neighborhood input to these plans or these thoughts, interest from vendors, fair bidding, garbage, electrical, water access, and shoreland protection. So those are all things that we would recommend the town over the next several months consider, possibly for the next season. And I think that's it on that one. Any questions or comments, thoughts?
Rick.
Yeah, one of the things you want to consider, and you touched on it, but this year, New Hampshire was limiting parking to 50%. So I think we want to be aware, really educate ourselves about who is limiting parking right now. If that was affecting us, we were getting the overflow from some of those that could not park there. So we want to see what the other states and other areas are doing. And the other thing is we have a lot of pop-up parking lots. And I know you and I talked about this earlier. We have a lot of pop-up parking lots this year because of the ability to help everybody try to do business the best they can. I think that that needs to be addressed. If we're going to limit our parking in the main lots, we shouldn't be having another parking lot that we can't count those numbers. We have no idea what they are. So again, we want to keep that in mind too. Thanks.
So my thinking would be that those pop-ups would go away because they're an ordinance variance.
One
know how
assumes, I also just want to not miss those either.
Yeah. And I wasn't aware of those until last night. I don't know, I didn't know about those.
There are
So-
some though that are not pop-up. There's one right going on Beach Street. There are a
Oh, yeah.
couple others that are sanctioned parking lots that are there all the time, not just this time of year. And then when the trolleys run again, people park out there too, and then the trolleys run. So, there are multiple ways to get to the beach without parking in the parking lot.
So, I mean, I don't think we should take anything off the table. I'm not gonna say anything, but I will remind everyone that after property tax, beach parking is our second greatest revenue stream. So if you do, I mean, you can always raise price, but then there's some inelasticity. Is that right? Economics. So if you do provide a revenue shortfall, the residents will make it up in their mill rate. I mean, that's just going to be a fact. So I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not saying that we're going to do anything like that. We could, but let's just make sure when we make recommendations that we incorporate all the angles into the discussion. And I know you're going to do that because you've taken this charge and gone much farther than I thought you guys would have gone. So I appreciate that. And
Yes.
I think it's something you guys should continue to get to a point where we can make those recommendations for next year, because I don't think we'll be doing anything this year. I know they were bandying about, high tide's coming on a weekend, let's close the something. And I'll be honest with you, I was a little bit vocal in that if you make that decision without the homework that you guys are doing right now, you're going to have chaos in this town. So you'd have, 1,200 cars with 200 spots because it's high tide, and where are they going to go? And I, directed them all to Village Green Drive, where one of my best friends lives. Right, Buzz?
We know who that is.
Yeah. Somebody did make a suggestion to me that, many people, and especially people that don't walk far or don't have the ability to walk far, come right off of Main Beach and kind of plop on either side. That somebody says, why don't you have some sort of like little, there's a little taxi that goes back and forth, some sort of little buggy service or bicycle service or something that could take people further down the beach and back, especially elderly people or something, and bring them back and forth. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know if that's even practical, but the idea came up, so I just thought I would throw that out there. Get people away from the Main Beach area.
Come on, Barbara. I smell a business opportunity.
There's a business opportunity there.
This is a dune buggy named Moon Over Maine.
Moon over
It's
Maine,
good.
okay.
Shuttle people up and down
With
the
an
beach.
advertisement for the Playhouse, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, we could do museum too. We could do a lot of
Self-funded. This is going to be
advertising.
a self-funded dune buggy. Stranger things have happened.
Yeah, I know they have. You see them on the boardwalks in New Jersey all the time, taking people up and down.
You can do Ben-Hur at the Playhouse, and you can use the chariot to roll the people down the beach.
They must be in storage right over here across the way, I'm sure, right? Ken?
The wheels are turning. I hope Brad's watching this right now. We'll have some good creative discussions. about it.
Rebecca,
We wrote this up as a document. My suggestion is that we send it to all of you and maybe pick it up again at another meeting with some serious recommendations for the select board to consider, or the planning board, if we think that some of these are feasible ideas.
okay, and good point. Now, I still think the dune buggy is not a bad idea. But
Right,
I hear
number 5 will be a dune buggy, okay?
Hey,
Why don't we, why don't you do that?
This is where I'm gonna get my extra spending money. Come on now, you know?
Send this out to everybody. Let's then everybody take a look at it. make, comments, and we'll take it up at the next meeting for a potential recommendation of whatever we think we'd like to do. So I think that will be a good step for 2 weeks from now. I think everyone can get a look at it, send back the commentary or hold commentary until the meeting, and we'll put a separate agenda item on here for managing beach congestion should there still be a pandemic in April of 2021. Okay, thank you. That's a very good comments and very good conversation. Thanks for the homework that you guys did on that. I appreciate that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Terry Ann and Buzzy, you are up.
I only have a teeny bit to report, so if Becky wants to bring on Bob McBreen, if he's here, I would yield our time. The only comment I have is the data from the marginal way folks indicates that during August, the usage was 75% of what it was in 2019. Their guesstimate is 90% mask compliance. The only comment they had was the mailbox with free masks seems to empty out fairly frequently. So oftentimes when people come, there isn't a mask there. And they also thought it was a good place to indicate that social distancing is not, you're not able to social distance on Marginal Way, please wear a mask as a signage on it. So that's all I have. Buzzy, did you have anything?
I really don't. I do have some opinions on the things we talked about, Kent and Rebecca, and all the work they put in. I have some definite feelings about that, but we can wait till we get the whole paperwork and go over it and go from there. And appreciate all the hard work everyone's put in. Patsy.
Okay. I'm watching the time here. If you can bring on, if you want to bring on your guest, you're welcome to. But it's going to have to be 5 minutes because we lose Zoom to the Charter Commission at some point. So I got to manage the time.
I don't have anything for at the at-risk population, and I don't know if Charlie does, but so we could probably yield our time too. I think the only thing that I would say is, and it's very small, is that we're all exhausted. We're all tired of washing masks. Wearing masks, sanitizing our hands, washing our hands. I could sandpaper things right now with my hands. Eating outside, social isolation, a lot of frustration, exhaustion, underlying depression, all these things that you see. So I think that we need to be cognizant of the fact that we are still in the throes of this pandemic and not to let our guard down, whether it's someone who's 20 to 80, we're still all at risk. So, as difficult as it is, we just can't let the guard down at this moment in time. And my friend Anthony says the same thing. So I yield.
Okay. Alice isn't here. Rick and Buzzy, and we'll come back to Mr. McBreen. If Rick and Buzzy, no Alice, is anything on your agenda item?
The state or the grant that people are applying for, that there's like 250 million or something like that for businesses to apply. That came out last week from the governor's office, but that's otherwise, I think we're just seeing the businesses trying to follow as closely as they can. And I think you're right, Pam. I think the change in weather and change in season is going to make people think that we're done and we're over. And so I think as businesses and as residents, we need to kind of remind ourselves that it's still, just because the season's over doesn't mean that the pandemic is over.
Also, just as a point of the business, I definitely would like to have a conversation about the use of food trucks. I don't like that at all. Secondary, I also like to start finding about clawing back some of the public use spaces for private business, getting that back. Anything we forwarded early in the season so they could allow to deal with this, getting it back so we don't set a precedent that they'll be using those spaces next year. And one of the things, not to do with business, but more to do with all the children and teachers and parents who kids in our district are going back to school here next week. We are in York County. We're in a green, but we're also in a green with a little asterisk next to us. We're also the only districts that going back full-time, Wells, Ogunquit. So these kids and these teachers are taking this thing right across the chest here, and they're going to push it as best they can to deal with this. So just want to be aware that all these students and teachers, this is a big transition over the next week, and I wish them the best. And whether sports work out, that'll find its way. But first and foremost, let's make sure we do everything to make sure they're healthy and happy and safe. Right.
Good point. Well said. So do you want to have
I don't know if Mr. McBreen is on.
I saw him there before. I don't know if he's
He
still
has
on or not.
whatever he wants to add. His graphs are very visual.
Yeah, he's on. So Tom, can you find Bob McBreen?
Do you want me to add him as a panelist or just unmute him?
You can add him as a panelist. We can see what he looks like. That'll be all right. If he wants to be looked at, he doesn't have to be. So many rules in Zoom land. Bob, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'll be
Can hear
real
you.
quick. Be real quick. I have very different data than that was discussed earlier for York County. One of the things I think the problem with your data is you're looking at cumulative numbers instead of recent numbers. York County positive tests are the highest that they've been during the pandemic on a 7-day average. York County active cases are the highest they've been during the pandemic for a 7-day average. This started before the outbreak at the jail. Any questions?
How does that fit into the outbreak in Sanford Fire Department, if any?
It was a few days before that when I sent out a daily update via email to people. Anyone who wants to be on, just send me an email. I'll include you. And I sent an update out before we had heard of the fire department or before we had heard about York County Jail, which is York County Jail is currently at 74 cases.
Okay, any questions for Bob? So just a logistics question, Kent and Rebecca, you're going to work with Bob here on his numbers, going forward, or is this a one-off? What's your pleasure on that? You're the data guys.
Kent, do you have an opinion? Would you like Bob to send you his information?
Yeah, we've seen that information before. To Bob's point, it does go a little bit counter. It's different data, not conflicting data to what Charlie's reporting on a regular basis. So I think it depends on how we want to look at the data, whether we want to look at it cumulatively or what's happening real time. And I think Charlie's been reporting some of the real time information as well. So Rebecca, any other thoughts on that, or anybody else? Charlie?
Mary Ann?
I guess it's what is the question that we're thinking the data could help us do? If in fact it could give us a better snapshot of the spread of the virus in our county, because I know we get a lot of public feedback about, well, the rest of the state is this, but we only have this many cases here. Data that is that shows us or would show us what's really happening with the spread in York County. And some of that is difficult because a lot of, as we know, a lot of the people who are, who are employed at the jail may well not live in Maine, so we don't see those numbers in the state data. So I think it really depends. I would like to see what the spread, if it's increasing in York County, that's useful to know so that we can keep the public informed and also make sure that we have appropriate recommendations and are thinking about, is there something else we ought to be recommending? So that would be my only thought. And I don't know what the best source of data for tracking spread would be.
Well, maybe this is something that Charlie and Bob and Kent and I can get together before our next meeting and present a variety of data, but specifically on your county. And it just feels very important, particularly to me as schools do open, to keep an eye on what's happening locally.
Okay, well, I think that'll be fine, if that's okay with Mr. McBreen. We should still be on.
Everything's fine with me. My data is 1 day and 7 day averages. Also can do 14 day, whatever works for you guys.
Okay, so we'll leave it with Charlie, Kent, and Rebecca for 2 weeks from now.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we can open it now to people who have their hand raised. Public comment. Tom?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, Mary.
This is Kirsten Ross. I'm on Highland Ave. And thank you for the opportunity to just add a few little things. If you're putting together information to present regarding beach access, there used to be a ramp just to the, I guess it would be the south end of the awnings. And, you know, as administrations change, sometimes things disappear and we don't know why, and they don't come back and we don't know why. It was a great little wooden ramp. And the beauty of it was that its angle was accessible for people, had better accessibility for people who had challenges accessing the beach on those metal ramps, because those metal ramps can be treacherously steep, and especially if you're trying not to touch things, it's kind of a hazard getting down onto the beach. So it was a really nice way to not have to funnel in towards the Norseman. But I don't know if it wasn't supposed to be there, if it disappeared after we did a little riprap project. I don't know where it went and why, but it was great. And it also kept people from climbing down the riprap in front of the Adirondacks, which, depending upon what the sand levels were, could be steep and unsafe, but now is very gentle and sloping. So that all can change very quickly depending upon storms and stuff. So that was a great little spot. I do want to encourage people to use that access behind the Norseman. That path does belong to the town of Ogunquit, and it's why they have the public access to the beach sign on Norseman Way. And especially like this weekend when the tides are high, at a time when likely a gorgeous weekend will be very, very crowded. It's a great way to skip having to wade through all the people in front of the Norseman, and to just, if you're able to take a little walk, just bypass the crowding and the congestion and head north. And when the tide is so high astronomically that it hits the Norseman Wall, it's also a great safe access onto the beach, and that does belong to the town. So if you don't mind taking a little walk, it's a wonderful access. So if you are talking to somebody about those ramps and access ways, again, we loved the little ramp to the south end of the awnings. It was a much more gentle slope. And thank you. And thanks to Bob McBreen. His data is fabulous. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Tom, anyone else?
That's it.
Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Unless anybody has a comment. Any other comment? No, too many hands went up. Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn? I have Pam, Buzzy, and Rick are making that motion. Seconds will be Charlie, Kent, Terry Ann, and Rebecca. Have a safe holiday weekend, and I'll look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. And send that stuff out, Rebecca and Kent, so we can all provide input and comment. And thank you again for your service to our community. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.